Hello, happy hump day.
Hello, happy hump day. Oh, how are you?
I'm good. I'm good. It's a beautiful day. It's not really Wednesday when we record this, but happy
Of
hump day
course.
to everybody else. It's a beautiful day. It's gonna be a beautiful weekend. I'm spending it with friends. I'm going to have a really good time. Very
Ooh,
excited about that. What
that is,
about you?
yes, I am excited. My uncle's here from New Zealand, so I'm going to see him, which is nice. But I'm going to try and I'm going to watch Black Adam and stuff. And yes, so we'll be doing
You've got
good.
a busy day.
Yes, busy couple of days, but that's nice.
It is nice. It is nice.
I can
Really
never get
nice.
over when we do these, how round my face is. It's just drives me nuts.
I'm gonna let you into a secret, Meenal, and tell you something. People's faces are round.
I know. Mine looks like a football.
No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. It's a speed. Just speed disproportionate. Not at all.
Anyway, yes.
Oh. And what did
Um,
you get up to last week?
Geez. Oh, I cooked last week, which is,
Mm.
as you know, is very rare
Yeah.
for me. I mean, like a full meal. Like,
Mm.
did a full meal. I did cake, which I burnt,
Nice. Ah.
which is also rare because I've cooked this cake. You've eaten it, ginger cake. I've cooked it like 100 times and it's been fine. But of course, when I invite someone over and make it, I burnt it. So yeah,
Ah, interesting. You're
yeah,
cooking a lot more these days.
a little bit, yes. Oh yeah.
What did I do? Oh, we went to see oh, Woman King.
Oh yes, we did.
That was amazing,
That
that
was a really
movie. I
good
loved it.
movie. I did too.
Um, Viola Davis was fantastic in that movie. It
Mm.
was just powerful, riveting, had you on the edge of your seat. I was just like constantly like, oh, like this, rooting for these powerful women. It was amazing. And I had not realized, actually, it was a bit of a history lesson. I know it's not necessarily factual, a little bit of a history lesson for me because I had no idea that African countries were complicit in their slavery. I didn't realize they were selling their own people or
Yeah.
the tribes into slavery. I had no idea. And I guess it's a kind of, well, be enslaved or enslave others kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. And especially, well, I mean, that movie predicted, well, not predicted, showed how a tribe that wasn't as wealthy was improving their status by selling slaves. I don't,
Yeah.
obviously, we don't know how accurate all of that is. But yeah, I can imagine that if you figured out that's one way to earn money, then yeah, that would be,
I guess the closest thing we have to it now is human trafficking still happens.
yes, modern day slavery. That's,
Yeah, the modern day version. It's just
yes.
sickening. I always like struggle to see things like that because I just can't understand how you can treat people like that.
I remember a story in India where they found a girl that was locked in an apartment. She was like a domestic slave, basically, because there were doctors who owned that apartment. When they went on leave, they went on holidays, they locked her in there. So she couldn't leave. Anyway, they found out and obviously, arrested them and stuff, but it was horrendous. So yeah.
That's terrible. But there was controversy around the movie you were telling me. I can't
Yes, there
remember why you
was
were.
because that tribe itself was said to be quite brutal, and they're portraying them as more heroic and things like that, but they were said to be quite brutal, especially when warring with other tribes, and
Hmm,
so yeah, man,
okay, there's
yeah,
controversy.
it,
However, brilliant film, right?
it was a good film. It was, and they did such a good job. I mean, I thought so. So,
Mm,
yeah. I
yeah,
mean, weirder stories have been told, I feel. So I think it still has merit.
Yeah.
Despite
do you know, I can't remember what we were talking about. We are talking about another film, maybe, where I was saying, it's great to see a Hollywood film with so many black characters where they're not all like criminals and slaves.
Yeah.
Do you remember when I would say that? But
Well,
this is kind of like, well, there was a lot of slaves in this one, but yeah.
yeah. But there were also very empowered characters. Like, I mean, it was what caught me was it was a movie that didn't depict a tribal scene or African village as decrepit and, like,
Yeah.
it was like normal and
Yeah.
it was a beautiful place. Everybody lived happily and, it
Yeah.
was nice. The fact that it didn't have to be squalor and yeah. So
Well, actually, that is like more like what it is like or what it was like. Yeah, it was more empowering and powerful depictions. You're right. You're right. Definitely. Well, a lot more positive. Sure. Right. What story do you have for me, Meenal?
So I have one from the BBC. It's very sad. So this is from the 3rd of November, which is a few days old. But the headline reads, Cassius Turvey, Aboriginal boys killing puts spotlight on racism in Australia. I hate titles like this because they, it's almost like, oh, we forget about racism in Australia and then something happens and then we're like, oh, yeah, shit, yes. Yeah, I guess it does kind of happen that way, especially in the media. But okay, so 3 weeks ago, Aboriginal teenager Cassius Turvey was walking home from his Perth school with friends when a stranger allegedly pulled up in a utility van and told the group to run. What happened next has shocked Australia and posed hard questions, many say, about the pervasive racism in the country. I mean, hard questions. We ask this all the time, but okay. Passengers in the car allegedly chased down the Aboriginal boys who were wearing school uniforms and before 2 were violently attacked. One victim was already injured, a 13-year-old boy whose own crutches were used to beat him, causing bruising to his face, authorities say. The other was 15-year-old Cassius, who police believe was assaulted with a metal pole. The Nurunga Yamaji boy, sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong, died 10 days later after suffering seizures and 2 strokes from serious head injuries. And then there's a warning in the article to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander readers who, obviously because there's images of the young boy who died. A 21-year-old white man, Jack Stevens, and then it says James Berreley, which there's no comma, so I can't tell if that's 4 names for one guy or 2 different names, has been charged with murdering Cassius and assaulting the other boy. Police have not ruled out further charges against Mr. Berreley or others, which I assume were other people in the car. I mean, I don't understand why one person was charged. Like, genuinely, like, everybody who was in that car should be charged. Like, I don't know, yeah. Western Australia police say it was a possible vigilante attack after Mr. Berreley's car was damaged the day before, but there is nothing to suggest Cassius and his friends were involved in the earlier incident, police say, nor any indication they knew their alleged attackers. I think that's a cop-out. Who gives a shit about the car? Officers are investigating claims the boys were racially abused before the attack. That's a given. But Commissioner Cole Balch has urged the community not to speculate about a motive or jump to conclusions. I'll piss off. It may be the case of mistaken identity. It may be the case of the wrong place at the wrong time. Oh, sure. Yeah, good old wrong place at the wrong time. But others, including Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, has said the attack was clearly racially motivated. Of course, like, you'd have to be a moron not to see that. Noongar community leaders wrote in an open letter, Cassius was not in the wrong place at the wrong time, 100%. He was in, sorry, 100% with me. He was in his school uniform with his friends in broad daylight. Like, Mr. Blanche has since said he regrets using those words, which were widely criticized. But the killing has sparked national grief and anger. Thousands of people have attended vigils for Cassius in more than 24 places across Australia, with events also being held in the US and New Zealand.
Oh.
Even before the attack, Indigenous community leaders were scared for their kids, according to Emily Farmer. Her son was among those walking home with Cassius. I've told my child, you're an Indigenous boy. They're going to look at you and think these awful things. Just try and be smaller. Oh. I hate that I had to explain that to my son at this age. For many years, it has provoked memories of high-profile killings of other Indigenous teenagers, such as 14-year-old Elijah Doherty. 6 years ago in a WA town, Kalgoorlie, he was run over by a man in a four-wheel drive who believed the teenager had stolen a motorcycle from his home. The man was acquitted of manslaughter, but convicted of a lesser charge of driving dangerously, causing death. Oh, for real. Human rights lawyer Hannah McGauley says she also is reminded of other deaths. Lewis St. Johnson, 19 in 1992, Cleon Jackman, 14 in 1999, and Thomas T.J. Hickey in 2004. All were attacked or pursued in racially discriminatory scenarios that would not have happened to white children, according to Dr. McGauley, a member of the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. This is shameful. It's an absolute blight on the nation that young kids can be murdered like this. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people suffer disproportionate rates of violence. Statistics show in some parts of the country they are 6 times more likely to be assaulted than non-Indigenous people. Australia does have a shocking reputation around the world for this kind of violence, says Dr. McGauley. Michelle Turvey says her son was the heart and soul of his community, jovial, kind, and larger than life. There was no reason for anyone not to like him, she said in a statement read out at vigils across the country. He was so concerned about negative stereotypes of Indigenous young people that he started a pay it what you can for lawn mowing business at the age of 13. Cassius wanted the community to see that young people weren't bad people and they could do good things. Ms. Turvey wants changes made in Cassius's name, including investments in youth programs, bullying awareness, anti-racism initiatives, and she wants justice over his death. Only a month ago, she buried her husband who had cancer, and now she's burying her son. Yeah, I'm heartbroken for no reason. I've lost him. He should be with us today, going to school, playing footy, and living a long life. Yes. Well, that's tragic. But when they talked about, disproportionate rates of violence, that's obviously we're all aware of that. Even the incarceration rates for Indigenous Australians, male and female, are, so much higher than non-Indigenous. So it's crazy. And I think we heard a few weeks ago, months ago, I can't remember exactly, about the 10-year-old boy who was incarcerated. And I can't even remember why, but it doesn't really matter. He's 10 years old. He's that young to prison. So
oh man, it's just appalling. And more appalling that it continues to happen and nothing seems to change.
Yeah.
I remember before I moved here, and I was telling people I was moving to Australia from the UK, and family members were really worried. They're saying, "Why would you move to Australia? It's a really racist country." Because Australia has this reputation, right?
Yeah, of course.
But I didn't understand.
Mm.
I don't, and plus, I don't like racism, whether it's there is racism or there isn't. I don't want that to dictate what I can do with my life. So obviously, I didn't listen and came.
Mm.
But yeah, it's shocking to hear these things still happen.
Yeah.
And I really I can't understand a community angry. Can you understand how angry it must be?
Yeah.
Besides the grief and heartbreak, especially when you're hearing people getting off with lighter sentences, and then
Yeah.
you're hearing about 10-year-old Indigenous children going to prison.
Mm. Absolutely. And I feel like, we've talked about this, about, when we were growing up and racism and things like that. I feel like that's improved for, say, people like me.
Okay.
I haven't had to deal with stuff like that for years. So I feel like there has been an improvement towards, say, immigrants and things like that from other countries in Australia. But I feel like since I was younger to since I was, now, I don't feel like there has been a lot of shift in how we treat Aboriginal people. Not a visible, not one we can tangible shift in how we think about them and how we treat them. So yeah.
I think the key for me there, this is what gets me, how we think about them. Because even obviously, I'm not from Australia originally. I can't profess to know the history or, the ins and outs, the politics of it all. I don't. I come here as somebody, an outsider, hear it and just observing, taking in what I observe and what I hear. And I remember hearing white Australians talk casually about Indigenous people from their childhood growing up, they're no good and they're this and they're that. Very disparaging, degrading comments, really. Nothing like extreme racism, but it is racism, obviously.
Yeah,
talking about like this attitude that they're no good, they're bad, they're criminals, they're always up to something. So it is what you think. What you think that becomes that attitude that makes you automatically assume, oh, my bike's been stolen, must be Aboriginal, or my car's got damage, it must have been an Aboriginal person.
Yeah.
And even if it was death.
Yeah, exactly. For a motorbike or for whatever happened. Like, I just don't get it. Like, and that's part of the whole thing, isn't it? Like, if you thought your motorbike was stolen by like somebody else who wasn't Aboriginal, would you necessarily go out and go
run you down?
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
It's that whole thing. No, I think he took it and he is Aboriginal, therefore I'm gonna do this. It's just
it's the extreme reaction as well, which suggests racism.
Yeah, exactly. It's not just people have shit stolen or taken from them, whatever, all the time. Nobody's going to be like, I'm going to kill the person. Like people say, but I'm going to kill the person when I find out who did this or whatever. It's almost like, no, he did it, so I'm entitled to
take this person's life.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's just disgusting. And another thing that struck me as well, talking about not just about how they're portrayed, how Aboriginal people are portrayed as a generalization, no good, bad, but then also, well, there's two things. When you're told you're that from a very young age, you live up to that reputation. It's very easy to live up to that reputation, and you create that, and also that young child, reportedly by his mother, was trying to turn around that perception by doing good deeds from the age of 13. So he's clearly a shining star, and to leave this world in this way, is just horrendous. I can only imagine the only good thing, if there's anything good at all, which never is that something has to change.
Yeah.
Somebody has to do something about it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is what we've talked about many times about representation, right? Because most people, possibly you and me included, don't know that many Aboriginal people, don't see them on our screens, don't, you know, so when you don't have realistic, you know, conversations and realistic perceptions of who these people are, you're going, if somebody demonizes them, you might go, okay, I don't know any better. You know, so that's why it's so important to see more Aboriginal people on our screens, to be able to talk to and you know, converse with people outside of these situations, you know, and just be like they're normal people like everybody else, like it
just like you and me, basically.
Exactly, like it doesn't. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I have been privileged to work with some Aboriginal women because I volunteer at what is now called Success Works. Success Works is a charity, and it works with women who've experienced the criminal justice system. That's in the top level, it's women, criminal justice system. So they're women that have come out of prison and helping them build their lives, helping them find homes and jobs, becoming financially independent. That's basically this charity and I work with them and I get mentees to mentor and support them. And I've had a few and they've all been Aboriginal. So I hear the stories. I get an understanding of what their life's been like.
Yeah.
And I always get angry.
Yeah.
Angry on their behalf. Yeah. Because how they're treated.
When you hear stories like that.
But also it's just, well, even I'd like to not go into the types of crimes because I'm not, you know, I'm not making judgments on the extent. But yeah, you're right. You were even saying earlier, like even just youth, Aboriginal youth, I think make up about 5 or 6% of the Australian population. It's part of the population, 5 or 6%, but it's like, is it 50, 60% are incarcerated compared to, it's just.
Because the Aboriginal population in Australia isn't very big.
No.
Like 2 or 3%, like all up, it's like nothing, you know. Yet they're overrepresented in so many areas.
Overrepresented, discriminatorily overrepresented.
Exactly. You know, in incarceration, in deaths while incarcerated, in very poor health outcomes. Like it's crazy, really. I think that, you know, we live in a first world country, but the Aboriginal, especially when it comes to health, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander have the health statistics of a third world country.
Wow.
So it's actually really bad from just even a health perspective, in terms of access and all of that as well, which is where I encounter most of my attitudes, you know, towards Aboriginal people, because especially when I worked in a public hospital, we would ask the question of everybody, obviously, because you know that you can't just look at someone and know whether they're of Aboriginal heritage. So we ask everyone, you know, are you born in Australia? Do you have Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander heritage? Because obviously if they do, they're entitled to have an Aboriginal liaison officer to help them through their medical journey.
I didn't know that. That was the reason for the question.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's the reason for the question, because obviously it's actually much harder, and given the rules and things like that, well, not rules, but certain ways that help an Aboriginal person, it's important to have that Aboriginal liaison officer so they can help bridge that gap, which we've identified lead to poor outcomes for Aboriginal patients, right?
But what is the gap?
Well, because they have, you know, their health is in general is so much worse. You know, they die earlier. They have higher rates of mortality. They have, you know, in general, like I said.
But what's the reason? Like, why how does the Aboriginal liaison person?
There's lots of reasons that contribute to all of that, but what we're trying to help with the Aboriginal liaison officer is because, like when dealing with police, right, there's a whole lot of history with Aboriginal people and dealing with people in the health system, doctors, nurses, whatever, judgment and not getting what they want. So if you say something to an Aboriginal person and they don't take it the right way, right, they may never come back.
Right, I see what you're saying.
You've lost them. Because you've said something that you haven't really realized is triggering to them.
Yeah,
that's why the Aboriginal liaison officer is so important to be there, because they like actually no, that's not what and this is how he's going or she's going to interpret that, and you may not be intentionally trying to, and you definitely don't want to lose that patient. So that's
now I understand
why they're there.
Thank you. To help bridge the cultural intricacies so that they maximize that relationship and the health outcome for that person. 100%. Yeah, and I've seen examples of that with other marginalized communities, which some of which I put in my anyway, I'll talk about that later. Another separate thing that I created about bias, basically. And it's an unconscious bias of a person not understanding.
Yeah, absolutely.
And really, we should all take responsibility for understanding cultures prevalent in the countries we live in.
Yes. And I think I had an amazing course that I did at this public hospital, and it was like about 4 hours long, which talked about, why is there a need? It's all about, Aboriginal health and, all of that. And she was amazing. Like, she was very passionate, the one who did the course. But it makes you understand how important it is.
Yeah.
That you're actually doing what you're supposed to be in the health system, and trying to bridge that gap the best way you can.
Good.
But also I've had that. So obviously I've asked people, patients, do you identify as Aboriginal? Do you have Aboriginal heritage and things like that? And most people just say no, I don't. But then you get the people who are like, no. And then they're sort of offended that you've asked, why would you ask me that? And it's just a standard question, which is what. And then you have the tiny subset of people who are like, oh, I'm not Aboriginal, and then go on to say things like.
Say derogatory things about Aboriginal.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I'm always in that.
I guess you have to bite your tongue.
Yeah.
Because, you don't. As much as you may disagree or have strong opposing views, that person still deserves that healthcare, the best healthcare, and you could make them obviously not come back or whatever as well.
Yeah.
Although, I would struggle with that. Personally, I would really struggle. I mean, I guess I'd have to be able to respond in a way that's respectful of the situation and that person, but also makes a point that I want to make, because I could not say anything. It would be too hard, especially if I had to deal with it all the time. Yeah, it would not be easy.
It isn't an all the time situation, but yes, I've had to deal with it a couple of times.
And talking about that, because you have to ask the question because you don't know. Because like one of my mentees that I was given, she's blonde hair, blue eyed. And I had no idea she is Aboriginal heritage, because it never came up in conversation, because it's not the focus of our discussions.
Yeah.
Right. Until helping her find work, we're looking at this role that was for someone with Aboriginal and Torres Strait background. And this is my bias and ignorance, said, oh, well, you probably can't apply for this job.
Yeah.
Right? That's what I said to her. And she says, oh, actually I can. I am. And then she explained. And I was so surprised, but you shouldn't be. It's a reminder to me. You can't assume that here. Whereas, and generally, any biracial or ethnic minorities, like from my background, African, you can tell whether because of the skin color, the eye color, even features.
No, you can't tell with
you cannot tell.
The training that I had that was run by that woman who was really good, she looked completely white. Like 100%. But she obviously was not at all. But well, that was the whole thing, I guess. Back in the day, they did notice that you could read out very quickly, and that has contributed to the genocide of people. So
lots of things. Oh, we could talk about this. So that's a very disturbing news, very distressing. And we felt we needed to share it because there's a problem. I guess it's like, what can you do about it? You're listening, like, and you're thinking, because I'm thinking there's different people, different types of reactions. There's a non-Indigenous people feeling like they're under attack or being judged as racist, as a generalization, right? There's going to be non-Indigenous Australians that really feel that and think it's terrible, it shouldn't happen, but don't know what they can do about it. And then everybody else is just really angry and pissed off and grieving and wants change, demands change.
Which leads into, you were talking about the Uluru statement and...
yeah, actually, yeah, because somebody handed me a leaflet the other day, and they were talking about the Uluru statement from the heart. And it's basically a call by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to have real and practical change in Australia through establishment of constitutionally enshrined voice to Parliament. Because, like you say, it has to come from the top.
It does.
Things have to come from the top to change. You know, the support systems, availability, institutionalized racism, programs. Because you know, that program you went to that's for the health services could completely transform people's attitudes.
Yeah.
So we need things like that.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And they need to be prioritized.
Yeah. But they also need to come from Aboriginal people. Like, I don't know how many times, you know, Aboriginal people have said, hey, you can't just decide, oh, you're going to run this program. You know, as a government, we're going to run this program. Like, it needs to come from Aboriginal people, and this is what we need to do.
Yeah,
you know, you can't just keep telling a group of people this is what we're going to do. You know,
yeah, it needs to come from Aboriginal people, exactly. So this Uluru statement, I guess, is they want a consensus of Indigenous people to elect representatives, Parliament, and they're holding on the change in the constitution. So I think that's the sticking point. And they want a fair go for Indigenous Australians to be recognised First Nations in the constitution. And I didn't understand, because I don't, and who does necessarily, why that would be such an issue. And Meenal was explaining it to me. Thank you for educating me on the difference between saying you've settled in a country versus that you've conquered the country. If you've conquered a country, then you have to recognise the Indigenous population in the moving forward in government. But if you settled a country, you're saying that there was no Indigenous people there, and you can do what you want, basically. Yeah,
basically, when they came here and they said this place was settled. First, they didn't recognise Aboriginal people as anyone, as a person, but it means English common law applied automatically, immediately. That's what it meant. Whereas if you then have to, so that's what they're fighting for. They want their, their to be part of the constitution. So it needs to change from the beginning, I think, to make any real impact.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, well, they want Indigenous-led solutions. That's what we were just saying. And services are the most effective in making improvements. So you need to support the changes so we can make changes high up. That's what you can do.
Yeah. So if this comes into a referendum, which I hope it does.
So do I.
Then please vote.
Yeah, if it comes into referendum, vote. And this is the proposed amendments. And this is the referendum question. I have it here because, like I say, somebody handed me a leaflet. So, do you support an alteration to the Constitution that establishes an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice? Yes or no, basically. And the amendments that are proposed, there shall be a body to be called the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice. The Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice may make representations to Parliament and the executive government on matters relating to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. And the Parliament shall, subject to this Constitution, have power to make laws with respect to the composition, functions, powers and procedures of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice. So that's the amendments. For a yes vote, those amendments are the amendments that will be made. So go to ulurustatement.org or fromtheheart.com.au for more information. So there you
go. Yes.
Yeah.
A very necessary first step.
Very necessary. I really hope there is a referendum. Totally vote for that. Okay, next story, a little more positive. Thank you. Because people are making a difference. People really are. So we have the title of the story. It's on ABC News. Bendigo's Dicey McGauley-Bartlett named Victorian Young Australian of the Year. Very young, it's like 24. So this is ABC News. Bendigo is a place in Victoria, and Dicey McGauley-Bartlett is named Victorian Young Australian of the Year. And he is a Aboriginal Community Liaison Officer for Victoria Police and has been instrumental in changing policy to ensure fewer Indigenous people enter the justice system and that they don't stay there if they do. The 24-year-old Gunai Mam helped create the state's first Aboriginal youth cautioning program to ensure all young Indigenous people are eligible for a caution when coming into contact with the justice system for the first time. He says, I actually started as an Aboriginal health practitioner as Bendigo and District Corporation and was an amazing opportunity to find my passion in healthcare, he said. Then moved to Victoria Police to work with our most vulnerable young people and adults entering the justice system. And Mr. McGauley-Beitler had a difficult start to life, growing up in a dysfunctional environment, struggling through his schooling and his teens. I actually grew up in a kingship place with my grandmother, he said. A lot of my family members had been in and out of the system, whether it be child protection for the criminal justice system. I've seen the system's failures. It was an offhand comment by a school teacher that prompted his drive to create change. I remember a teacher at high school saying to me, Dicey, you don't write the rules, and that really stuck with me, he said. I thought, well, I don't write the rules, but they don't work for our people. So how about I be part of the change? And that's what it's been about for me, ensuring my community has a fair go. Mr. McGauley-Bartlett said he was determined to keep Aboriginal health in Aboriginal hands. It's going to be a journey, but I'm here to fight for that journey. The Victorian Australian of the Year recipients will progress in their respective categories as nominees for the National Award. And national recipients are always announced in the new year, aren't they? January 2023. Okay, so maybe all the states, I don't even know how this works, all the states must nominate someone and then they get chosen for the national position. But what a great guy.
Yes, but it's amazing. I'm always fascinated by people who have that clear, moment, where they're like, no, this is not cool and I'm going to be part of the change,
Well, you have that moment. You're doing this. You're doing this podcast. That's what it's about. Being part of the change.
Part of the change.
Part of the change. This guy, there's a photograph here. And again, obviously he's Aboriginal, but there's no physical characteristics to make that assumption.
Yes.
Yeah. It looks like a white Australian.
Yeah. Yeah, well, yeah, that's it. People, can't just assume.
No.
Just because you don't look like a person of colour that you can't be Aboriginal.
I know, but it's a bit conflicting. And I had this conversation with one of my mentees who has that, who doesn't look white. And it would have had to identify as an Aboriginal to get that role.
Yeah.
But there's the two things. It's like you have white privilege. He will have white privilege.
Yeah.
Because when you look at him, you don't know that he's Aboriginal. So attitudes will be completely different, not knowing that he is Aboriginal. And then obviously I wonder if he's ever experienced that whole change in attitude.
I'm sure he has. I remember talking to one particular person, obviously at work, and I asked her the same question, are you of Aboriginal descent or heritage and whatever? And she goes, I am, but I don't claim it.
Yeah, so there you go.
Yeah, so, because she finds it easier.
Yeah. Easier to live, not identify as Aboriginal when you are. And that says a lot.
Super sad.
Super sad. And that was different for me, but similarly for me as well. Growing up in a predominantly white neighborhood, white school, I didn't have a choice.
Yeah.
I couldn't identify as white.
Yeah.
Because it was obvious I wasn't. However, it's in the Black community, it's similar.
Yeah.
I'm not Black enough to be Black. Yeah. I have white privilege.
Yeah.
Honestly, this is true. If you're lighter skinned, in lots of countries, even in African countries, you seem to have a privilege.
Oh, it's
absolutely. And actually, it's even in Indian cultures, it's similar, right?
Literally not yesterday, what day was it? Thursday. I was talking to a patient and whatever, and I get this all the time. Oh, what's your background? And patients are you just curious, So I'm always, I'm, Fijian Indian, blah, blah. He goes, oh, you're very light-skinned for a Fijian Indian. And I've had that so many times, and I never know what to say when people.
What do you want to say? Let's just take the filters out. What do you want to say?
I'm just like, thanks, but I don't think that's the compliment that you think it is. Like I'm just like, I'm like, she goes, and I'm just like, I didn't know.
What do you know? What do you know?
I was being a dick a little bit, but I was just like, oh, I didn't realize that Indians were, like I'm lighter skinned, and what it goes, oh yeah, Fijians and Indians are usually much darker. I'm like, oh, are they? And I'm just like, what is this conversation that I'm having?
Yeah.
So yeah.
But what does it mean?
Yeah, exactly. Because I don't know. I think obviously even non-Indians are aware of how much Indians discriminate with when it comes to skin color. So I don't know. Like, but that's been the whole thing growing up. Is that the only thing that I would get complimented for, really?
But it's like, how do you know it's a compliment and not just an observation?
Well, because people view people with lighter skin in a more positive light. I don't know. It's supposed to be a higher beauty standard or something.
Okay.
So people will, and if you've ever been on any of those Indian matchmaker, Indian
TV shows,
dating websites, they will actually have a category for color.
No.
Oh yeah, I've never said this. Oh my God.
No.
The first time that I saw it, and I remember the first time that it says, color, and I remember thinking for a second, like, what are they talking about? Then realizing, holy shit. And it goes from, I can't remember now, but it's like fair, wheatish, and I forgot what the rest of it is, but I don't think
50 Shades of Brown.
I remember thinking, I cannot deal with this, like it just, oh man, because growing up, my brothers are, they're great at cricket and they're really smart and they're, like all of these things. And me, everybody's like, oh, Meenal's fair. Like it's almost like
that's your attribute.
That's my attribute. Like, and I'm just like, oh, it makes you wanna. I'm just like, oh, that's nice. That's really.
It's not really an attribute you want to be identified with necessarily. No, I know what you mean. No. Yeah, and like same with me. People compliment, oh, you've got beautiful skin and skin so soft.
On a date with a guy.
Oh, don't even get me started with that date that I had to escape from very quickly.
You were just the right color.
I was just the right color. Just the nice right color brown. Yeah, well, it was touching my arm. Yeah.
Oh man.
I was just like, I don't. If you compliment my skin for its health, because health is a high value of mine, and I really like to focus on health.
Yes.
Like in what I eat and put in, and you know, that's different. But if you're focusing on my skin color, I can't do I have no control over that.
I know.
So I don't particularly enjoy it's not necessarily a compliment, although I'm not going to poo-poo it. It's just when it's repeatedly, it's just like, it's telling me that you're either criticizing it or you're complimenting it, right? And then you're telling me this is a beauty standard that is out of my control and other people's. It's not something you should want to be judged by, really, personally.
But I love how much it's changing. I never saw Bridgerton first season, whatever. The second season, though, I loved it. And I loved the two Indian girls in it. I love that they were a beautiful shade of brown that is usually not appreciated in, proper, media or whatever. Yeah. And it was just, I remember telling my mom, her, I'm like, dude, if I'm not even like, and she's my mom and they have so much, sex in that thing, but I'm like, it doesn't matter. I'm like, just go and watch it. I'm like, you'll feel good. It made me feel good.
Oh, wow.
The Indian girls
it's beautiful. We had talked about that before. I was just wondering because even, in like China and Asian countries, there's the whole keep not getting tanned and having these sun umbrellas. And I thought, so, and I could be totally wrong. It came from the lower classes working outside, working in the fields, working on the farms, and they would become very tanned because they were exposed to the sun. So that was kind of a physical representation of poor, lower class.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if that's where it comes from. So that you're darker, you seem to be of lower class. And they, over the hundreds of years and thousands of years, it's kind of stuck in the psyche of a culture.
I think that's definitely, I believe that's where it comes from India, but also the British occupation of India. And
okay.
That became a standard, being white and things like that became, a thing. So
white and light is more superior or something.
Basically, it's a superiority thing. So therefore, that's something to aspire to.
And there'll be maybe white people listen to this don't even understand how that's a thing. That's a thought. That's a thought, a mindset.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Even a feeling.
I must say, and I do this and I feel really bad. I don't know why it came up, but one of my friends who's Asian is married to a white man. He's lovely, and I for some reason we came onto the whole, how white are you? Blah blah blah. I don't know.
How white is who?
In general, how white are you? And he jokingly said, "I'm super white."
Oh, he's white. Do you mean like skin color or behavior? Like, what do you mean?
No, skin color. Like he's very white. He doesn't tan very easily. Whatever. I don't even know why we were talking about it. And he goes, and we're like, yeah, we're aware you're very white, blah blah blah. And then he goes, no, you're not. And then I think he lifted up his shirt, and I sort of gasped. And he's like, what was that? And I'm like, oh my God, you really are very, very white. And then
like milk bottle. That's what my mum would describe it as, milk bottle wine.
Then he's like, geez, you're dramatic. And I'm like, I was just like, oh my gosh. Anyway, sorry. Yes, you're right. It's perfectly fine. You look great. I do remember sometimes we are a little bit harsh, so fair enough. I'm just like, and this has happened twice, so I'm just like, never do it again. Like, never do it again, So,
so funny. All right, we better move on quickly because we're like going out of time again. All right. In What Would You Do, Meenal?
Yes.
You ready for a What Would You Do? So we're talking, this is in the context of a workplace, virtual meetings, today, most of the world works virtually, where you're working from home, you've got meetings. That's very, very common these days, post-COVID.
Yeah.
So this is in that context. So your manager, you're on a call and your manager calls out a team member during a virtual meeting for not turning on her video when she seems reluctant to do so. So what would you do?
I don't think I'd do anything. To be honest, I've been in this situation,
Okay.
because I think myself and my manager also, like, we're very, like, I always turn on my video. I'm usually at work, to be honest. I can't remember the last time I worked from home, so it makes no difference to me. I can understand people working from home sometimes, I don't know, are not, maybe haven't combed their hair or still in their pajamas or something, so they have a reason not to want to turn on their camera. I've always thought it's nice to turn on your camera. So if I have a team meeting, like one-on-one with a person, I'm usually like, oh, you haven't turned on your camera. And then they usually either turn it on or don't turn it on. I don't force people to turn it on if they don't want to, but I do mention it and go, hey, do you want to turn on your camera? Huh?
Yeah.
So I think it's normal to say something. I don't think it's normal to force someone.
Yeah, I mean, similarly, I've been in this situation, and I guess I wouldn't say I force people, but I very strongly recommend people put the video on, and I kind of say like, oh, please put your video on. Be really good to see your face, who I'm talking to, and also from a leadership perspective, because I'm a leadership coach, communication is only 7% of the words you say.
Yeah.
So part of the communication, if you want to be impactful, if you want to make your message understood, if you want to really listen to what somebody's communicating to you, it's really important to see them as well, because you can see, what's going on, not just hearing or listening to the voice. So that's another part of why it's so important. It's really important from a communication perspective to also see people.
And to be honest, me, myself, if I have turned my camera off, I'm not paying as much attention.
There you go. Yeah, there's that as well.
Doing other things in the background.
Yeah. But what's interesting, so that was like, when I worked in the pharmaceutical land and I was leading teams, that's what I would encourage people to do. And there would be people that were not comfortable, for sure. But the more you do it, the more comfortable people got. I think part of that uncomfortableness is seeing themselves.
Yes.
And that's a whole other issue that we'll bring up another time. Part of it is seeing themselves, where you can pin the speaker. You don't have to look at yourself, but at least everybody else can see you, right? Well, in Zoom anyway, you can pin the speaker. But this is what this says, because it's making me think as well now. It says, being put on the spot like this can trigger anxiety and stress. So if you're in the meeting, you're like, you need to turn your video on. Yeah, it can trigger anxiety and stress. It says if the employee has her children with her, she may be being judged as unprofessional. And you have that where we were forced to homeschool, or forced to have your children home, or they're homesick or whatever. There must be that attitude that it's unprofessional because you're supposed to be working, so you shouldn't be dealing with your children. But that's the reality of the world we live in, right? And people working around the hours of business hours to make up for that. So you've got a bias that can affect all parents, but impacts women more than men, as women are more likely to be interrupted by their children. Women are also penalised more than men for not looking well groomed and put together. Well, it's true in the sense that people in the media and everywhere are always commenting on women's appearance. So that suggests you also have, when you're, you need to always look good, right? And this creates a particular burden for Black women, like me, who have to spend a lot more time on their hair to avoid negative judgments. And this is because of a biased belief that natural hair is unprofessional. But this is my natural hair, and I do not care. I think it's lovely and it's professional for me. So this is obviously very American kind of idea. There's Black women everywhere. I've not got makeup on now. I go into my meetings, I don't wear makeup. I mean, my hair's quite low maintenance, if I'm honest, but I understand for some Black women that isn't the case because they may like braid it or whatever. It's just high maintenance to look professional. And it may be different if you're on with clients or doing a deal, whatever. You may need to be made up. I've come on calls with people and they'd be very made up. They're wearing suit, makeup, hair, immaculate. And I notice and I'm like, wow, you look great. you know, you must have had to put 2 hours before this meeting to prepare. So I guess there's that idea that you need to look that way. And I think in context, in certain circumstances, maybe that's important. But I don't think it should be the expectation all the time. So it made me think when I'm like, put your video on, it made me think a bit about what could be going on. But what you could do is you can speak up and point out that whoever it is, no video on, they're there, they're participating, even if you can't see them. You know, it's okay to leave your video off from time to time. I do that sometimes. Like, you know, sometimes I leave my video off if I haven't done my hair, whatever, just make a comment. And then later talk to your manager about it separately. And then we'll say why it happens. And this is what this says. Managers may insist on video because they want their team members to feel connected, especially if they cannot be together in person. Or they may ask employees to turn on video to ensure that everyone is productive and engaged and not doing other things. Both reasons. But this does not take into account everything an employee may be balancing while working from home, including childcare and housework. And it doesn't make allowances for the anxiety employees may feel about how they look or their home looks on a busy or chaotic day. That's why we have now virtual backgrounds, and I think virtual backgrounds are wonderful. And I have to say, it's been a bit weird being on a call with someone. These have all happened. Being on the call with someone with the video on, talking to them, and all I'm seeing behind them is a pile of washing. It's distracting, I have to say. I'm like, oh, I'm looking at the wall. So whatever's in the background can be actually distracting to others. True. So you need to take that into consideration, which is why I love virtual backgrounds. But yeah, seeing people builds connection, helps you stay engaged and focused, and read people so you can communicate effectively. So there's all those reasons. But then there's also the consideration of, depending on the context of the meeting, what's going on for that person, that just might not be a day to have your video on.
Yes.
So we get that, right?
100%.
Oh, but yeah, it's really interesting because I'm working for this client, and I think it's a culture thing. Maybe I'm making an assumption. Working with a Chinese client, and we have meetings, and nobody puts the video on. Not a single person. I started because I'm used to having my video on, so I started my video on, and I'm sitting there, and I'm like, I'm the only person with my video on.
Yeah.
If
I'm in a meeting like that, and maybe I've been in once or twice, I will turn my video off.
I've started to turn my video off because nobody else has. So what am I? I'm just looking at myself.
Exactly.
There's nobody to look at. They don't even have profile pictures.
Yeah, which is weird. I like, if you don't have videos, I like that you have a
profile picture. If you don't have a video, at least have a profile picture. That's exactly. So that people can at least feel like they're talking to someone.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Especially because if you don't know, it feels weird to talk to someone, you know, that isn't on a phone and not know what they look like, you know.
It is, yeah.
So,
but yeah, just really interesting. I'm working with this company, and that's the scenario. None of them use the videos, and they don't have profile pictures.
Yeah, that is bizarre.
It is very bizarre. Anyway. Okay. We need to wrap it up right now.
Okay.
Oh, as usual, always a pleasure.
Yes.
Thank you.
It's good
vote for the referendum.
Yes.
The Uluru statement. Look it up, read about it, inform yourself. And we'll speak to you next week.
Yes. Bye.
Bye.